The Sumerians built the first cities on Earth. They invented writing, the wheel, the 60-minute hour. Then, around 4,000 years ago, they vanished from the record. No war, no leaving, just gone. Their language went silent, their gods were forgotten. For most of modern history, experts treated them as a civilization that ended without an heir. At least, that's what everyone thought. Because in 2011, a team of DNA scientists went looking for Sumerian blood in living people, and they found it, packed into one exact place on the map. If you're into forgotten civilizations and what modern DNA is quietly dragging back into the light, hit subscribe. New deep dives every week. 4,000 years before that lab went hunting for their bloodline, the Sumerians were the most advanced people alive. They lived in the flat country between the Tigris and the Euphrates, in southern Iraq. They drained marshes and built canals. They stacked mud brick into towers that scraped the sky. They pressed wedge-shaped marks into wet clay and created the first true writing in human history. We still live inside their inventions. The 60 minutes in your hour and the 360 degrees in a circle come straight from their counting system. All of it traces back to that stretch of riverbank. What still spooks people is how suddenly it all seems to arrive. To a lot of people, that has always felt less like a slow climb and more like a gift dropped from somewhere above. The Sumerians said it in exactly those words. They said their knowledge came from the Anunnaki, the gods who came down and taught them. Hold on to that claim. It matters more than it sounds, and we are coming back to it. And then they were gone. Not in a war that wiped them out. Around 2000 BCE, the Sumerian language stopped being spoken on the street. Other peoples moved in. The Akkadians, the Babylonians, and Sumerian lived on only in writing, the way Latin lives on in a church. The cities emptied or changed hands. The name Sumer fell out of use completely. By the time the Roman Empire existed, no one on Earth remembered that the Sumerians had ever lived. For thousands of years, they were completely lost. We only found them again in the 1800s, when teams digging in Iraq kept finding a language underneath the Babylonian one. Older, stranger, belonging to no known family of languages anywhere on Earth. A people with no children down the line, no living thread, a trail gone cold. Up to this point, the Sumerians had been the strongest power in the ancient world. That was about to flip, and the way it flipped left a question that sat unanswered for 100 years. Because here is the problem. A language can vanish. A civilization can be buried under sand and silence. But people don't just disappear. The men and women who built those cities had children. Those children had children. Genes don't care what your empire is called. They keep moving forward, generation after generation, whether or not anyone remembers the name. So where did the Sumerians go? For a long time, nobody could even begin to answer that, and the reason is grim. You would think the obvious move is to dig up a Sumerian skeleton and read its DNA directly. Read that DNA, then compare it to the living. Simple. Except southern Iraq is one of the worst places on Earth to keep ancient DNA in one piece. DNA falls apart fast in heat like that. We have thousands of clay tablets from Sumer. We have almost no Sumerian DNA we can actually read. So the scientists did the only thing they could. Instead of starting with old bones, they started with the living. Is there anyone alive today whose DNA still carries a trace of that vanished people? Pay attention to this next detail, because it explains everything that follows. There is one group of people that has lived in the exact same place, the southern marshes of Iraq, for around 5,000 years without leaving. They are called the Marsh Arabs, the Madan. If you have never seen them, picture this. A flat sheet of water stretching as far as you can see, where the Tigris and Euphrates finally meet and slow down before the Gulf. Water buffalo wading chest deep through the channels. It looks like a scene from 3000 BCE because, in almost every important way, it is one. Take the reed house. The Marsh Arabs call it a mudhif, a long hall for special gatherings, built from bundled reeds bent into high arches, no nails, no wood, no metal in it anywhere. They have been raising them this way for at least 5,000 years. And we know that is not a guess, because there is a carved stone panel from the ancient Sumerian city of Uruk, dated to around 3300 BCE, sitting in the British Museum. It shows a reed house, and it is the same house. Same design the Madan build out of the water today, a design that has barely changed in 5,300 years. The Marsh Arabs have a claim about themselves. They say they are the last of the Sumerians, the direct bloodline of the people who built the first cities, still living on the same water. For most of the last 100 years, outside experts rolled their eyes at that. The Marsh Arabs are latecomers. They drifted into the wetlands not that long ago, probably when water buffalo and rice farming arrived from India. A nice story about where they came from, nothing more. But the version you've heard? That's not the full picture. In 2011, a study landed in the science journal BMC Evolutionary Biology, led by the DNA scientist Nadia Al-Zairi and a team based at the University of Pavia in Italy. They were searching for the DNA footprints of the Sumerians. They collected DNA from 143 Marsh Arabs, plus a large set of other Iraqis to compare against. Then they read two specific parts of the DNA. The Y chromosome, which passes from father to son almost unchanged, and the mother's line, carried in something called mitochondrial DNA. Those two lines are how you trace a family line far back in time, because they don't get mixed up every generation the way the rest of your DNA does. The first thing they found seemed to settle the boring version of the story. The Marsh Arab gene pool was almost entirely local, Middle Eastern, through and through, for both the male and female lines. The water buffalo and the rice may have come from India and the lands around it, but the people who raised them did not. They were from here. So far, nothing special. A local group that stayed local. At least, that's what the surface of it seemed to say. Then they pulled out one branch of the male line, and the timing stopped them cold. The marker is part of a Y chromosome line called J1, and one smaller branch in it that the study labels J1, page 08. Every man carries a Y chromosome handed down from his father, almost unchanged across the years. Once in a great while, a tiny harmless typo appears in it, and from that point on, every son down the line carries the same typo. Gather all the men who share one of these typos, and you have drawn a single branch on a family tree that can reach back tens of thousands of years. J1 page 08 is one such branch. But in the Marsh Arabs, the researchers could see a local spread of this branch, a moment where this one father line suddenly grew and spread across the people. And when they dated that spread, it lined up almost exactly with the rise of the Sumerian city-states in southern Mesopotamia. That's not a typo, by the way. As the first cities were being built, this male line was exploding through the same patch of ground, not centuries off, same time. That was only round one. And if that were the only signal, you could still call it chance. But then they looked deeper into the same J1 family and found an older, rarer branch underneath it, one that ties the southern marshes back to northern Mesopotamia. A deep base reaching back to the first farmers of the region, and on top of it, a newer wave that arrives right when Sumer arrives. The data that came next made it even harder to wave away. The male line in the Marsh Arabs is oddly alike, more alike than the female line. Sons stayed. Generation after generation, men stayed in the same marsh their fathers had worked, while the rules and habits around marriage and family kept that father line in one place. It is exactly the pattern you would expect from a group that never left, never scattered, never got pulled into the big waves of people moving across the rest of the region. The researchers were careful about what they claimed, and so will I. They did not prove that every Marsh Arab is a Sumerian. You cannot, not without the ancient DNA we can't recover. If any living people come from the Sumerians, the evidence points hardest at the Marsh Arabs. And if the Marsh Arabs come from the Sumerians, then the Sumerians themselves were a local people, born from that land, not visitors from anywhere else. A vanished civilization with no known heir. Turns out the heir may have been sitting in the same marsh the whole time, for 5,000 years. If you're finding this as strange as I do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. It really helps the channel, and there is a darker turn to this story coming up that almost erased the answer before anyone could find it. So, a people thought gone may have survived in plain sight, but what happened to that marsh next made the quiet survival look like the easy part. The same cut-off life that kept this bloodline safe for 5,000 years was about to be turned into a weapon against it. The marshes were hard to reach, wet, trackless, walled off by reeds taller than a man. Empires passed by overhead and left the marsh people alone. Being cut off is the whole reason a 5,000-year-old fatherline could survive in one piece into the 21st century. It protected them. And then, in the 1990s, that same cut-off life became the thing that nearly destroyed them. After the 1991 Gulf War, a Shia revolt broke out in southern Iraq against Saddam Hussein, and the marshes gave the rebels exactly what they had always given anyone: cover. Saddam's answer was to go after the cover itself, not the people first, the water. His government built canals and dams to push the Tigris and the Euphrates away from the wetlands. They drained the marsh on purpose. The same water that had kept that culture alive since before the pyramids was simply turned off. NASA photos taken across the 1990s show the wetlands shrinking year after year. By 2000, around 90% of the marshes were gone. Roughly 9,000 square kilometers of water and reeds shrank to under 800. The land cracked and turned to salt desert. The buffalo were gone. The fish were gone. The reed houses had nothing left to stand in. In the 1950s, about 500,000 Marsh Arabs lived in those wetlands. By 2003, the number still living there had fallen to somewhere between 20,000 and 40,000. Hundreds of thousands were forced from their homes. Tens of thousands fled across the border into Iran. The United Nations later called the draining of the marshes one of the worst nature disasters of the century. To put it lightly here, for the single best living record of Sumerian roots on the planet, that is not great. Because here is the cruel part. Everything that made these people priceless to science was the very thing being destroyed. Their value was that they never moved. Drain the marsh, scatter the people into the poorest parts of Baghdad and the refugee camps of Iran, break up the families, and you don't just move a group off its land. You shred the exact pattern the researchers were reading. The unbroken line that proved who they were was being wiped out on purpose a decade before anyone published the proof. Everything that had protected them was working against them. If the story had stopped there, this would be a very different video. The answer to where the Sumerians went would have been lost in a drained marsh, and we would be standing here talking about a people lost twice, once to history and once to a dictator. Now, this is the channel where we usually talk about the Anunnaki. There is a popular idea, made famous by the writer Zecharia Sitchin in his 1976 book The 12th Planet, that the Sumerian gods, the Anunnaki, were flesh and blood beings from another world, and that they planted a royal bloodline into the human race. In that telling, hunting for Sumerian DNA means hunting for the fingerprints of those visitors, a secret family line from the stars. I want to be clear that this is Sitchin's reading, not what most experts say, and most experts firmly reject it. They argue his readings of the words are wrong, and his answers made up. That complaint is fair. And the actual DNA tells a story that is far more haunting than Nibiru. There is no alien marker in the Marsh Arabs. And no, I'm not making that up. The data is plain in the most beautiful way. What the J1 line records is not gods, it is grandfathers. An ordinary human father line, passed from one real man to his real son, over and over, 5,000 times, through floods and empires, and a near erasure, never breaking. The wonder is not that the bloodline is rare or strange. The wonder is that it is so completely, stubbornly human, and that it refused to disappear. Which brings us to the question in the title. If one nation on Earth carries the most Sumerian blood, who is it? The honest answer is the one the science backs. Modern Iraq, and inside it, the southern marshes most of all, not a hidden tribe in the mountains. The strongest DNA echo still left of the people who built the first cities sits almost exactly on top of where those cities were built. The heir to Sumer never moved, and the marsh itself refused to stay gone. After 2003, when the dams came down, local people went out with picks and shovels and broke the dirt walls themselves, and the water came back. The wetlands have partly recovered, buffalo wade through the channels again, reed houses stand again. In 2016, the marshes were named a World Heritage Site, honored at last as a living link to ancient Mesopotamia. Families who fled have come back to the same water their ancestors pushed their boats across when Uruk was new. They are building mudhifts again, bending the reeds into the same arches carved on that 5,000-year-old stone in the British Museum. The design survived the dictator the same way it survived every empire before him. The Sumerian story isn't one of a kind. We talk about civilizations as if they end. Rome fell, Sumer vanished, Babylon collapsed. But those words describe names and governments, not people. A name can vanish in a single lifetime, a bloodline almost never does. All across the world, the children of the so-called lost civilizations are still here, farming the same valleys, carrying the past in the one record that no empire and no dictator has ever fully managed to destroy, their own blood. The Sumerians were called a civilization that ended without an heir. They were nothing of the kind. The heir was in the marsh the whole time, building a reed house, watching the water, waiting 5,000 years for someone to finally read the message written in the only language that lasts longer than everything else. And it was never lost. We just didn't know where to look.